I wasn't even supposed to be in those jungles. We were just exploring an old part of the forest where almost nobody goes. Everything there is so overgrown that sometimes you literally have to cut your way through the vines. And at one point I noticed something strange, a huge nest. At first I thought it was just a pile of branches, but when we got closer it became clear, and it was a real nest, and a pretty old one. And in the center of it lay an egg, and it was huge. At first I honestly thought it was some kind of rock, but when I touched it with my hand, it was clear. Oh, this was definitely an egg. Only one thing was strange. Judging by the condition of the nest, it had been lying there for a very long time, possibly years. By all logic, there shouldn't have been anything alive inside anymore. But then the egg moved slightly. Honestly, in that moment, I just froze. And that's when I made possibly the strangest decision of my life. I took the egg with me. Day 10. By that time, my garage already looked, to put it mildly, unusual. I had turned it into a huge warm terrarium, lamps, heaters, temperature sensors, bedding, even a small nest. The problem was that I still didn't know who exactly would hatch from that egg. But if there really was an ancient creature inside, it needed warmth. And one night, the cameras recorded movement. The egg started to crack. Day 12. That night, I barely slept. The cracks kept getting bigger, and at some point, the shell simply broke apart. First a beak appeared, then a wing, and a few seconds later, a small, wet, and very strange creature was looking straight at me. A little pterodactyl. He squeaked, wobbled, and clearly had no idea where he was. But the strangest thing happened a few seconds later. He looked at me and just grabbed onto my jacket with his claws. It seems that in that moment, he decided that I was his parent. And honestly, I didn't mind either. Day 14. Honestly, I had no idea what to do with a baby pterodactyl. He looked like a strong gust of wind could carry him away. Huge wings, tiny body, and constant squeaking. The first thing I tried was feeding him. Turns out that wasn't as simple as I thought. At first, he didn't even understand what to do with the food. I placed a small piece of fish in front of him. He stared at it for a while, and within a minute, he was eating like he hadn't eaten his entire life. After eating, he would immediately crawl under the heat lamp and fall asleep. But there was one thing I noticed pretty quickly. He was constantly trying to climb higher, on boxes, on shelves, sometimes even onto my shoulder. And one day I realized why. He kept trying to spread his wings, at first clumsily, then a little more confidently. It was like somewhere deep inside he already knew what they were meant for. And honestly, that's when I started getting a little worried. Day 30. That morning I didn't wake up because of my alarm. I woke up because a plate shattered in the kitchen. I jumped out of bed, ran in there, and saw a scene I definitely didn't expect to see in my life. This little guy was trying to fly all over the kitchen. And not just fly, he was bouncing from wall to wall, flipping plates with his wings, knocking over spoons, hitting the blender, and generally acting like he had decided to host his very first air show right in my house. I didn't get scared. I just straight up lost my mind, because just a couple of weeks ago he could barely stand on his legs, and now he was flying around my kitchen like he'd been doing it his whole life. Well, flying might be a strong word, but the fact remained, he had already settled in, and he had already grown a little. Not a lot, but enough for his antics to stop being just cute. Day 60. By that point, it was clear that my house was already too small for him. He had grown, his wings were much stronger, and now his attempts to fly didn't look like funny jumps around the kitchen anymore. Now he was actually flying. Well, almost. Sometimes it looked pretty impressive, and sometimes it looked like complete chaos. But the real problem happened one night. I was sleeping peacefully until around 3 in the morning when someone started ringing my doorbell. When I opened the door, my neighbors were standing there, and they didn't look very happy. Apparently, while I was asleep, my pterodactyl somehow got out through the window, and then flew straight into their house. And judging by what happened next, the first thing he found was their kitchen. When they woke up, there was a pterodactyl sitting on their table, finishing everything that had been in the fridge. I honestly don't know what was stranger in that situation. The fact that there was a dinosaur sitting in their kitchen, or the fact that he was eating cake. Of course, I had to apologize. A lot. Day 61. I loaded the dinosaur into the car and drove him out to the forest because it had become obvious that he needed training. He was growing too fast, and the more confident he became in the air, the harder it would be to control him later. So we had to start right away. The first thing I decided to teach him was to fly back to me on command. I would step a short distance away, call him, and show him food so he understood exactly where he was supposed to land. At first it was pretty messy. Sometimes he misjudged the speed, sometimes he landed way too hard, but little by little he started getting better. Then we moved on to command. commands, the simplest ones. Come, stop, wait, down. I needed him not just to fly wherever he wanted, but at least sometimes listen to what I was saying. And honestly, that part was harder. Sometimes he followed the commands perfectly, and other times he just looked at me like he had no idea why I was giving orders in the first place. But the longer we trained, the more progress I could see. He started flying back more confidently, landing closer to me and ignoring me less often. And at some point I realized that maybe this could actually work. There was just one problem. The better he got at flying, the more he started to enjoy the freedom. And that usually doesn't end quietly. Day 80. By that point, the training was actually starting to work. He was flying back to me more reliably, ignoring commands less often, and in the air he looked like he had been born there, not in my garage. And honestly, that was probably the problem, because the better he got, the more relaxed I started to feel. That day started like any other. We drove out to the forest, I gave him a few simple commands, and he did them almost perfectly. Then he took off, made a wide circle above the trees, and hovered there for a moment. I whistled for him to come back. Usually that was all it took, but this time he didn't even turn his head. He just climbed higher and kept flying. At first I didn't panic. I figured he'd make another loop and come back like always. A few seconds passed, then a few more. I called him again, nothing, and that's when my stomach dropped, because for the first time I realized something I really didn't want to think about. If he decides not to come back, there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. I started running in the direction he flew, whistling, calling his name, looking up through the trees, and after a while I didn't even know where I was anymore. The forest suddenly felt huge, way too huge for someone trying to find one flying dinosaur. An hour probably passed, maybe more. By that point I had already gone through every worst case scenario in my head, that he flew too far. And just when I was about to completely lose it, I heard a familiar sound above me, a soft snorting noise. I looked up and there he was. This idiot was sitting on a thick branch with a swollen belly, looking absolutely fine for someone who had just taken 10 years off my life. Turns out while I was running around the forest looking for him, he had found a patch of wild berries, eaten so much he could barely move, and then fallen asleep in the tree. That was the moment it really hit me. I could feed him, take care of him, even teach him things, but I would never be able to control the sky he was meant to fly in. Day 150. By this point, he had grown way too much. Despite all the training, he kept knocking things over in the house, hitting the windows, tearing the curtains, and it felt like he simply couldn't live inside four walls anymore. And at some point, I realized something important. It wasn't that he was badly trained. It was that he was never meant to live in a house. He wanted to be outside, in the sky, where he truly belonged. So I made what was probably the hardest decision of this whole story, to move him to another continent, to Africa, to a huge wildlife sanctuary where different animals live and where he could feel both safe and free. Transporting him was a challenge on its own. I saved him so that one day he could be free, and then he took off, first low, then higher still, until he disappeared into the wide sky, and that was the moment I knew our story had truly come to an end.